For as long as people have called this place home, they've been welcomed with clean air, clean water, and an abundance of nature. As time went on, people saw the need to balance how we build cities with how we protect farms and forests. That's why across Greater Portland, in 24 cities and 3 counties, there's one metro government that brings us all together to maintain that vital balance, to provide services across cities and counties, to create a better future together. Hello, we're Metro. We plan for housing, jobs, and safe transportation. We protect land, air, and water by managing garbage and recycling. We support arts and culture by overseeing local venues to keep the economy growing. And we connect people to nature across 17,000 acres of parks and trails and at the Oregon Zoo. Metro is all of us working together, connecting how we live today with how we plan for the future. Hello, we're Metro, and so are you.
Good morning. I'd like to call to order the Metro Council business meeting. We have a quorum for October 19th, 2023. Connor, will you please call the roll for attendance? And folks, I'm going to have to stay off of video because my signal is not very strong as I had hoped. So when I can, I'll toggle back and forth, but in order to have a good signal, I'm going to have to keep the video off. Apologies. Connor, will you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you, President Peterson. Councilor Gonzalez.
Present. Good morning.
Good morning. Councilor Lewis.
Present.
Councilor Simpson.
Present.
Councilor Nolan.
Good morning, all. I'm here.
Good morning. Councilor Wong.
Present.
Councilor Rosenthal.
I'm here.
And President Peterson.
We know she's here.
Yes, it does appear on Zoom at least that her video has frozen.
Mm.
Yeah. All right. Councilor Lewis, I think we may have lost President Peterson. Are you able to step in?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Oh.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Councilor Lewis.
Okay, I think that was giving me the go-ahead to move us to our next item on the agenda. Do we have the safety video? Do we play safety video?
Not yet. Could we please play that?
Hi, I'm Justin Dunlap, and I'm the department head stagehand electrician at the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall. Safety's a big part of my job. From electrical, making sure that I stay up to date on the NFPA codes and regulations, to rigging, where we make sure that everything is safely suspended overhead, to egress, ensuring that our audiences, performers, and technicians have the safest possible route in case of emergency. I'm out here at the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall, and you're in the Metro Regional Center. Please note that we're on the 3rd floor of the building. In the event of a fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room. Go down the steps to the 2nd floor and exit through the main entrance by the reception desk. In the courtyard outside that entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the front desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue.
Great. With that, I will move us into our agenda. The first item is public communication. Connor, can you please describe for our participants today our procedures for public communication?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Lewis. So if anyone wishes to testify on non-agenda items, now is the time to do so. Public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes, and I'll manage the timer to go off of the 3-minute mark. If you've not already signed up to speak, you can do so now. If you're joining us in person, you can sign up by filling out one of the blue cards in the back of the room and bringing that up to me. If you're joining us on Zoom, you can sign up by hitting the raise hand button, which, depending on your version of Zoom, is either at the bottom of your screen or within the reactions tab. So for those joining on Zoom today, I'll call your name and you'll see a window pop up asking you to accept a promotion to a panelist. Once you accept that, you'll be able to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. And as a reminder to everybody testifying today, you do not need to give your physical address. However, please do identify yourself for the record before testifying. So with that, President Peterson, councilors, there was some written testimony that was distributed to you all yesterday. We have not had anybody sign up to speak in advance, but I will give folks in our Zoom and physical audience just another couple of seconds to get their hands up if they would like to testify. All right, and seeing no hands going up, Deputy Council President Lewis.
Great. Seeing no comment, I am going to close public communication and move us on to the next section of our agenda, which is presentations. Item 3.1 is our transfer station operating controls audit. And with us today is Brian Evans, our Metro Auditor. Welcome, Auditor Evans and your team. I will hand it over to you. We will hear from you, and then we will hear management response directly after you. Auditor Evans, take it away.
Thanks, Deputy President Lewis. Good morning, Council. It's good to be with you today. I'm joined today by Maggie Muldrew, who's a Senior Management Auditor in my office. We're here to present the results of our transfer station operating controls audit that was published last month in September. The purpose of the audit was to determine whether Metro had effective policies and procedures to manage transfer station operating risks, and we had three sub-objectives. The first was to determine if controls for health and safety were sufficient to meet Metro guidelines and OSHA standards. The second was to determine if performance management controls were sufficient to ensure Metro received what it paid for from contracts. And the third was to determine if the point of sale system captured complete and accurate transaction information. As a reminder for the audience at home, Metro's Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Department manages 2 publicly owned solid waste transfer stations in the region. Metro Central is in the Northwest Industrial District in Portland, and Metro South is in Oregon City, just off of I-205. Together, these facilities process about 39% of the waste generated in the region before it's sent off site for final processing at a landfill or recycling facility, composting facility. Each transfer station is operated by a combination of Metro personnel and contracted employees. The audit includes a lot of detail about various parts of Metro's operations at the transfer station. The overarching conclusion is there are significant risks in the current operating environment which require immediate attention. And in several areas, current risks are exacerbated by a lack of clarity about what will happen next. This makes it difficult for employees and management to make best use of available resources. Without additional clarity, it's more likely that resources will be used for efforts that may be at cross purposes. The audit found that transfer station operations are at a critical moment in time. The global pandemic created a lot of challenges. Intense weather events have closed the stations on several occasions in recent years. Long-serving employees have retired, and the buildings, equipment, and point of sale system all require substantial investment. In addition to these challenges, there were gaps in roles and responsibilities that increased health and safety and financial risks. Procedures to manage some risks were underdeveloped or not assigned, and ad hoc management practices reduced accountability and transparency. The audit included examples that show the types of health and safety, financial and environmental risks associated with solid waste operations. For example, household hazardous waste programs present the most obvious risk because they are expected to deal with the most challenging materials. And also, garbage and recycling materials can pose significant risk if they're not managed properly or contain dangerous materials such as lithium batteries, asbestos, or unknown chemicals. With that context, I'm going to hand it off to Maggie to present the results of our health and safety findings.
Thank you, Auditor Evans, and good morning. The audit found the effectiveness of the health and safety program was reduced by shared responsibilities among and within Metro departments and external contractors. Policies and procedures were not kept up to date. Many health and safety policies required to be reviewed annually to ensure staff adhere to required procedures. The reviews were not completed in a timely way for 8 of the 10 policies we evaluated. Continued use of outdated policies and lapses in reviews could put workers at higher risk of injury and Metro at risk of non-compliance with legal requirements. WPES also oversees contractor health and safety requirements, Provisions in the South and Central contracts required adherence to Metro policies and procedures. We found that the health and safety contract requirements lacked consistent oversight. Health and safety policies also require workers to complete training, but some trainings were not offered or completed. For example, 97% of employees did not complete radiation safety training, 57% did not have training in asbestos awareness, and 53% did not complete hazard communication training. The audit included information about a number of incidents related to these types of hazards, which showed the risk to workers is fairly common. During the audit, we saw indications that incidents reported through the official system may not provide complete and accurate information. We received summary reports of incidents filed through the official system during 2022 for both transfer stations. The report showed a total of 144 incidents. After comparing these incidents to other source information, we found 60 additional incidents, or 29%, that were reported manually outside of the official incident report management system. Initial incident responses can help address immediate risks by restricting access or containing and moving a hazard to a temporary staging area. However, an equally important aspect of incident reporting is that it can identify trends over time and help management prioritize actions to prevent serious incidents from recurring. We heard there was insufficient data in the incident system to evaluate trends. Formal investigations were documented through after-action reviews, which were conducted on a discretionary basis. The written investigation policy for review was policy provided for review was more than 5 years old and not reflective of current incident reporting practices. During 2022, there were a total of 204 reported incidents, yet only 2 of them resulted in a formal investigation. We also found health and safety goals were not prioritized in the most recent regional waste plan. In the previous version of the plan from 2008, language related to worker health and safety was clear and direct. In the current plan, there was only one goal related to worker health and safety. The most recent performance update from January 2023 stated that WPES was on track to meet this goal in 2020 and 2021, but no data was provided. Another part of the performance report stated that indicators to evaluate the goal were in progress. I will now pass it back to Auditor Evans to discuss the audit's other findings. Thank you.
Thanks, Maggie. The audit also found that WPES did not use risk management tools consistently to manage contracts. We reviewed a sample of provisions from 4 contracts to determine how oversight was managed. There was little documentation of roles and responsibilities, so we had to interview many employees from across several different WPES divisions and also employees in Metro's finance and risk management department. The complexity of South operating contracts shows how critical it is to document roles and responsibilities for contract management. The contract is over 650 pages long and has a complex payment structure, which increases financial risks. The operator is reimbursed for equipment and maintenance costs, which require tracking 71 pieces of equipment, their depreciation schedules, and monthly maintenance work that can fluctuate from month to month. Metro and the contractors also split revenue for commodities recovered for reuse and recycling at the transfer station. Reconciling those payments requires tracking the quantity and value of 37 different types of materials. There are also regular fixed payments for different types of materials that come in on a per ton basis. There's also performance incentives that need to be tracked that can result in either incentives, payments, or penalties to the contractor for things like clearing the bay floor, managing the volume of material in the contractor pit. And something that we didn't look at but was appeared to be as equally as complex were the payments for workers and their wages. That was outside of the scope of this review, but also required a lot of detailed transactions and detailed reconciliation to make sure the payments were accurate. Through interviews, we learned that there were generally 3 roles related to transfer station operating contracts. There were the employees who work on site with contractors at Metro South and Central, other employees mostly in finance or in WPES, that reconcile invoices and initiate payments for services. And there's something called a contract manager role that is usually involved in creating administration plans for the contracts and serving as a liaison between those who process the payments and those who manage the on-site work. We found that each of these roles would benefit from additional documentation and checklists to know what is expected of that role. There were detailed requirements in each contract and limited resources, so having clarity about the frequency and amount of time that should be spent monitoring each provision is essential. The contract manager role is the one that we found most undefined among the contracts we reviewed. In some cases, the contract manager role was simply involved in procurement and had no other involvement. In others, they worked on procurement, monitoring compliance, and developing business practices to reconcile payments. We couldn't determine the specific cause of variation in each role. It appeared to be based on employee availability and past work experience rather than a systems approach to match roles with responsibilities. Significant issues with WPES's contracts for diesel fuel and the primary household hazardous waste contracts were also identified during the audit. Weak oversight of the diesel fuel contract led to at least $125,000 in overpayments and additional costs to investigate and resolve the contract dispute. The primary contractor for household hazardous waste collection and transport did not provide required documentation to show what had happened to the materials it picked up at South and Central. They also did not provide documentation of insurance coverage for a little over 3 years. Other examples showed unclear roles and responsibilities were not limited to contract management. Concerns about cash controls at the scale houses were reported to the accountability hotline in 2020 and 2021. Metro's financial auditing firm conducted a review of transaction management in 2021 that recommended updated policies and procedures for the point of sale system. We were told new policies and procedures were still under review as of May 2023, which was nearly 2 years after the management had received the recommendation from the financial auditors. Transfer stations, as you know, are at a pivotal moment in time. South has been in operation for 40 years, Central for 33 years, and the same point of sale system has been used at both stations for 35 years. At the same time, both transfer stations face uncertainty about their long-term operations. During the audit, several ideas about Metro's role in the solid waste system were being discussed. These included not operating any transfer stations, building additional transfer stations, and changing the type and services operated at existing transfer stations. Each of these ideas would be a significant change for the regional solid waste system and could have a substantial impact on WPES's costs, personnel, and public services. Regardless of what decisions are made, a long-term plan is needed to stabilize operations. The audit identified key decision points for several parts of the system that are important to consider. For Metro Central, who will operate the facility and what role will it play in managing the food waste in the region? For Metro South, how to maintain safe operations on such a constrained site, and how to make progress on a future vision for that facility. For the point of sale system, what software will be used to replace the outdated system, and how will the change management process be managed to ensure that a new system can come online while continuing operations. The audit included 20 recommendations. 7 were designed to strengthen internal controls for transfer station operations. 6 focused on strengthening contract risk management practices, 1 focused on the procurement process, and 6 aimed to reduce gaps and overlaps in the management hierarchy within WPES. I want to thank the COO, WPES Director and Deputy Directors, Garbage and Recycling System Operations Director, Asset Environmental Stewardship Director, Central and South Superintendents, and all their teams for their help during the audit. Finally, I'd like to thank Maggie for her work on the audit, and be happy to answer any questions you have about our work, or if you want to wait to hear the management response, take questions then. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Auditor. We're gonna go ahead and hear from management. So our COO, Marisa Madrigal, our Director of Waste Prevention Environmental Services, Marta McGuire, and our Deputy Director of Waste Prevention Environmental Services, Gary Stacy.
Thank you, Deputy Council President Lewis. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. McGuire.
Thank you, Marisa, Council President Peterson, and councilors, and Auditor Evans for the opportunity to respond to the audit. We appreciate the time and attention evaluating our operations and developing recommendations. I want to thank Auditor Evans and his team. I also want to thank our Waste Prevention and Environmental Services staff, including many who are here today with us, that contributed to the management response. We wholeheartedly acknowledge that significant risks face our transfer stations and appreciate your focus on safety, responsible contract management, and internal controls. As you know, I became department director a little over a year ago, which provided me a wider view of our operations, and you haven't really seen that much of me until this fall. And that is because I spent much of my first year focused on recovery from the pandemic, assessing the challenges and needs of our internal operations, establishing new positions, and ensuring that key projects were on track. I shared with Auditor Evans when he began the audit and shared the scope that these were also areas of concern that we as a department had identified where we needed additional capacity, improved systems, and resources. The audit recommendations further reinforce a clear path forward that we have already set in motion. We're grateful to the auditor for validating the importance of the transfer station operating controls and efforts we have underway, including our work on the point of sale system and facilities plan. I want to just touch on 3 key themes before I turn it over to Carrie, who will share more detail on our current actions to date to respond to the recommendations. The first one is safety. Our top priority is the safety of the public and our employees. Both personally and professionally, I believe safety is paramount to managing our responsibilities. My father is an environmental and safety engineer, spending much of his career working for the steel industry and U.S. Postal Service, providing oversight and training for employee health and safety. He's really helped shape my worldview when it comes to risk and safety and was a huge influence as to why I got into the field of environmental policy. I had field trips with him as a teenager visiting steel mills, and that left a vivid impact on me and the importance of centering safety and risk management in every decision we make when it comes to operations. As you know, every day more than 1,600 tons of garbage and recycling move through our transfer stations, about 40% of the region's trash. We are committed to maintaining an excellent safety record as measured by our lack of injuries, including the incidents cited by the audit. I want to acknowledge the exceptional team of staff that manage the operations every day. They put in an incredible amount of care, effort, and skill into serving our communities and keeping everyone safe. Additionally, I want to highlight that this summer, Metro Central went through a surprise OSHA comprehensive inspection focused on worker health. The inspection included a site visit, training, record review, noise sampling, air testing. They looked at all aspects of our operations, and we passed with flying colors, no violations. This is really exceptional and rare for these comprehensive inspections. Again, huge props to our staff for maintaining systems that protect worker health and safety. The second item I want to touch on is risk. The management of the transfer stations, in particular our statutory responsibility to manage household hazardous waste, requires us to manage risks in every day of our operations. The audit references a few of the more difficult scenarios we encounter, such as receipt of radioactive material and explosive. Materials management is a complex field. It's not as easy as garbage in, garbage out, and we are heavily dependent on customer behavior. We do not invite these materials into our facilities, but when a customer brings them in, unknowingly, it's our responsibility to handle them safely. Attention to risk and safety must be ongoing, and we agree that more consistent training will benefit our operations, and we are taking action. Lastly, the audit also underscored the need to look at our facilities at a more systemic level and set a long-term vision to stabilize operations. As you know, the system's facilities plan is currently under development that will identify long-term investments that we need to make into garbage and recycling facilities. Decisions on this plan will be critical to determine how to best modernize and improve our facilities to meet the region's needs. Part of the changes I have made as director included having a deputy focused specifically on internal operations, focused on oversight systems and process improvement, and I want to turn it over to Carrie Stacy, our deputy director, to share more detail on the work to respond to the audit. I know she hasn't been here before you and until now briefly during our budget, so I want to give her just a brief introduction. She started last July and has been focused on all of the areas noted in the audit. Previously, she worked as deputy director at Multnomah County's Department of Community Services, and before that was a long-tenured Metro employee with expertise in process improvement and change management in the COO's office, working across the agency. She also played a key role in Metro's operational response during the pandemic, leading safety policy development for COVID protocols. And I'm very grateful to have her as a part of our operations and providing oversight. So I will turn it over to Carrie.
Thank you. Good morning. As Marta noted, even before the audit started, our department had identified the need for greater oversight and resources for our internal operations. Last spring, WPES created a new Asset and Environmental Stewardship Division, AES, to focus on those priority areas of health and safety, environmental compliance, contract oversight, and facility maintenance. This new division was structured to proactively address areas of concern raised in the audit, is led by Courtney Patterson, who's with us today, Metro's former emergency manager. She reports to me, and in a year and a half, Courtney has nearly fully staffed this new division, which is making a positive impact on key projects cited in the audit. Before addressing details of our response, I want to emphasize the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic had on our garbage and recycling operations. Unlike many businesses, those operations did not shut down. Instead, they experienced their highest customer counts ever as people cleaned out garages and embarked on home improvement projects. Combined with those high customer counts, our operations were unable to hold in-person trainings and emergency response drills due to distancing requirements and other restrictions, and our safety program is now making up for lost ground. The audit has pointed out deficiencies in training and contract oversight that need to be addressed across Metro departments and teams. These coordinated efforts will take time, but all groups involved are committed to addressing them with urgency, and our work is underway. 3 main areas of the audit that I want to update you on: health and safety, responsible contract management, and improving internal controls for transactions. The first, health and safety. WPES hired a safety specialist in 2022 to work in the new Asset and Environmental Stewardship Division and is in the process of developing a comprehensive safety program for all WPES facilities. He is also here today. We are fortunate to have Aron Sala. He is personally and professionally committed to safety. As part of the program he's creating, WPES has signed a new safety training contract and is working to remedy training deficiencies that we experienced during the pandemic. There are 2 levels of training. There's required training and there's specialized training. As part of Aron's job, he provides the framework for the required training and ensures that we are in compliance with those. That includes OSHA 10 training, asbestos awareness, radiation awareness, hazard communication training, first aid and CPR, among others. Then there is specialized training. The safety program will include a health and safety plan for each facility and look at the work that every person does in that facility, called a job hazard analysis. That job hazard analysis looks at the 80 standard operating procedures in household hazardous waste alone, which informs any needed changes for specialized training for that specific individual. So in short, every technician has a level of emergency response training that is tailored to their role. So our written response shares details about the many trainings that are required that we have already completed and planned. Since that report and management response has been issued, I want to update you that radiation awareness training has now been completed for all our staff, and emergency response training in first aid and CPR will occur in December and early 2024. Aron is also in the process of getting recertified so that he can administer the first aid and CPR trainings himself. Another update to the management response is the safety stand downs, a new practice in which we will close our operations for a half day or a full day to ensure that all staff are trained and are able to participate in drills, will occur this November and December, which is months earlier than what we committed to in the management response. As for the specialized training, I won't go into a lot of detail, but if you'd like me to, I can. That is the training that takes more time. That will be completed by the end of next fiscal year because, again, it requires a job hazard and analysis for 80 standard operating procedures and for what every person specifically does and tailoring that training to what their activities are. I also want to add that WPES staff play a key role in informing the health and safety training. Aron has reorganized our safety committees to ensure that more staff can participate. He shares the concerns that he hears from staff to managers and he incorporates them into his safety planning. Staff participate in after-action reviews to share their own observations and recommendations. We have held 23 after-action reviews in this calendar year so far. And they also provide feedback that can inform changes. I'll give you one example. We are looking at installing a yellow jacket repellent garden at Metro South as a result of some yellow jacket nests and employees and customers that had been stung, and we will be going forward with this plan as a site safety improvement. Another example is the OSHA inspection that Marta mentioned identified just one area for Metro as a whole to look at. That's the heat illness prevention policy, and updating it to reflect how body temperatures can change when people are wearing Tyvek, which is a vapor barrier. I conducted an after-action event after the heat event in August of this year, and as a result, also identified that we needed to take a look at that policy to amend it to reflect the body temperatures when people are wearing Tyvek. Moving on to the second area of responsible contract management. We have convened with staff from Finance and Regulatory Services and the Office of the Metro Attorney. This summer, we convened to acknowledge the need for contract management training and identify what it should entail. As we said in our written response, OMA has advised that contract management training requires a tailored approach for different types of contracts. You cannot use a blanket approach. You have construction contracts, operational contracts, service contracts, real estate contracts, and on-call contracts. In addition, levels of contract management responsibility vary in relation to the size of the contract. Any training that we develop should also address the roles of procurement, Office of the Metro Attorney, contract administrators, department purchasing coordinators, project managers, and training should also include developing a scope of work, how to track charges, expenditures, and deliverables, understand legal language and scope, contract administration controls, and contract finances. WPES has identified Hannah Ferris in the Asset and Environmental Stewardship Division as the Operational Planning and Support Manager to lead this work. She comes to us from King County Metro in Seattle and has over 10 years of experience managing, negotiating, and overseeing contracts, both private and public agencies, which include risk mitigation, complying with local, state, and federal law, tracking and reporting, data analysis, planning, and prioritization. She and I have discussed the management response commitment to developing a contract administration, clarifying roles and responsibilities, as well as a training plan. We agree that our proposed plan is ambitious but doable, and in partnership with Finance, HR, and OMA, we will coordinate to develop that plan for contract administration by the end of this fiscal year. And we will be prioritizing training for contract managers who are responsible for riskier contracts. The third area is improving internal controls for transactions, and that is our point of sale system. Upon entering this role, one of my top priorities was to devote additional resources to successfully procure a replacement point of sale system for the transfer stations. Our Asset and Environmental Stewardship Division is closely managing this effort. We are currently in contract negotiations with the finalist vendor and anticipate a signed contract by the end of this month or by the first week of next month. The implementation of that system will include a comprehensive change management plan as recommended by the audit, and the transaction management policies and procedures that the auditor mentioned were being reviewed in May were completed in June of this year. I can add a little more information about fuel contracts if that is a question for you, but I will wait. I do want to summarize that in this in the audit, there were 20 recommendations. 2 of those recommendations were specific to strategic system facilities planning. Of the 18 remaining recommendations, 3 have already been met, 4 will be met, an additional 4 will be met by the end of this calendar year, and almost all others will be met by the end of the fiscal year, with the exception of that specialized safety training, which again will be complete by the end of next fiscal year. I want to acknowledge and appreciate the partnership of our central services. Half the audit recommendations require changes beyond WPES. In this past year, we have been working, and I have been working collaboratively with Finance, Office of Metro Attorney, HR, IT, and the Capital Asset Management Department to establish a shared understanding of safety, contract management, and transaction management needs. We've agreed on clear roles and responsibilities with our risk and safety teams, begun developing curriculum for contract management training, and prioritized replacement of the point of sale system. I also want to thank the auditor for recognizing the additional priority areas to ensure that we are strengthening our management practices to reduce risks in what is a very risky field. And then I will turn it back to our COO.
Thank you, Deputy Director Stacy. and Director McGuire. As I hope the council and public can see, Metro is responding methodically and aggressively to the recommendations in the audit, especially those around employee training, contract administration, and safety. As Dr. McGuire mentioned, many of these findings validate concerns and decisions that she's made as a new director as she analyzes and improves systems that have not evolved in many years, if not decades. I want to commend her for her leadership in driving the garbage and recycling system facilities plan, which will be before you again, as well as for implementing structural changes to improve safety well in advance of these audit findings. And to me, the proof of change is in the no violation surprise OSHA pudding. So thank you to you and your team, and especially the frontline staff at Metro Central. Dr. McGuire has the full support of my office in implementing changes to improve safety and any others that she deems necessary to accelerate our evolution. Willamette Week said in their story about this audit yesterday that managing 40% of the region's waste is a hard job. It's also an inherently risky job, one in which even rigorous planning cannot predict every possible scenario. These unknown unknowns are managed as they come by staff on the front lines who must and have applied their experience, skills, and critical thinking to keep themselves, our staff, and the public safe. Because of the unpredictability of what we may receive at our transfer stations, close calls are unfortunately normal. The auditor has rightly shared some of those close calls that are legitimately scary. But there is a difference between a close call and a tragedy. And I want to be clear to council and the public that more often than not, our staff are the positive difference. Our staff choose every day to prioritize safety in the face of unknowns. In public health, this is called the precautionary principle. Some might call it just better safe than sorry. But if you look below the surface of these reported incidents, you find our frontline staff applying nimble scientific approaches to protecting the public. Whether it's immediately isolating a customer's grandfather's rare radioactive needles, or in the case of the oil contract, identifying possible irregularities, alerting Auditor Evans, investigating and withholding payment to the contractor for the fuel cost and the cost of the investigation, until Metro could be sure that the public got what it paid for. And I want to be clear, because radioactivity is a scary word, that at no time was the public exposed to dangerous levels of radioactivity. A member of the public would have had to hold the material referenced in the audit for 90 minutes to exceed the yearly limit of radioactive exposure set for members of the public by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Household hazardous waste staff would have had to hold it, again, directly for 66 hours to exceed their higher yearly NRC limits. Instead, the material was contained and isolated far away from the public with larger margins than required, out of an abundance of caution, the precautionary principle again. Additionally, an inspector was contracted by the Oregon Radiation Protection Services Agency to assess risk and determine proper mitigation strategies for the material. The inspector found that our containment strategy was effective and they could not detect radiation in excess of background levels in the surrounding area. Again, at no point was the public in danger. Metro leadership takes the trust of the public seriously, and as the Chief Operating Officer, it was very important to me to make that crystal clear today. Also, in the interest of the public trust, though, I think it is important to own where we can do better. Regular training and tight process is absolutely critical to a well-run facility, and we thank the auditor and his team for illuminating where we can improve. It was an exhaustive and thorough process. Zooming out for a moment from garbage and recycling to the big picture, this audit has given me the opportunity to reflect on Metro's overall approach to safety and risk management. Throughout the pandemic, we surged resources and led a robust, centralized pandemic COVID safety program that consistently put us ahead of our peer institutions in protecting employee and public health. As we have moved out of the COVID emergency mode and the safety structures have returned to baseline, I'm seeing evidence that we need a more robust approach to risk and safety than we had pre-pandemic. Because while the pandemic has become endemic, other threats have risen in its place, from extreme unpredictable weather to unknown unknowns that societal and global instability may throw our way. We are making progress in a lot of areas, however. Convening an internal risk management advisory committee, as well as holding quarterly safety meetings with all departments, implementing a new training matrix that allows for online, in-person, and hybrid safety trainings, quarterly site visits to all venues, and as has been referenced, implementing an incident reporting software that provides consistent reportable data to help drive operational decisions around risk and safety. But again, we still have room for improvement. So in the coming months, we will be retaining outside expertise to assess Metro's enterprise-wide approach to risk and safety and provide recommendations on how we can be better prepared to manage risk in the future. Lastly, I again want to thank the auditor and his team for the opportunity to respond and for their thorough effort to examine our operations. Recognizing public and council interest in many of the audit's topics, we do have a number of subject matter experts here today from WPES and FRS and other areas who can respond in detail to specific questions that you have. That concludes management's response. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again, Auditor Evans, and thank you to management, CEO Madrigal, Dr. McGuire, and Gary Stacy. I am gonna hopefully be able to facilitate questions. Not ideal to not be in the room, but please use your little Zoom hand, and let's have our discussion now.
Councilor Rosenthal? Councilor Lewis, you're just coming through quietly on Zoom, but I think Councilor Lewis called on you, Councilor Rosenthal.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't hear. Thank you, Chair Lewis, and thank you. First of all, I wanted to say I appreciate the thoroughness of the audit. It goes along with my theory that we sometimes learn more from criticism than we do from compliments, and I think the thoroughness really points up a lot of issues that solid waste is aware of and working on, but also it needs to be pointed out, and it provides the room. And I also very much appreciate WPES's response and the fact that we are moving forward on these things. I'm quite aware of the fact that obviously training was something that was very difficult during the pandemic period. We had a lot of challenges, and we know about the challenges with the cost accounting system that we've been trying to resolve for now several years. I've been involved in the solid waste industry for probably 40, 50 years with significant involvement in both Lane County as well as King County. So I recognize that it is an inherently hazardous kind of process with a lot of unknowns and a lot of variables and a lot of people doing very different things that require very specialized training, and I'm glad that we're moving forward in that regard. So I think we're on a very good track. And the one question that I do have is, how do we define, we talked about the number of incidences, and I think is there a gradation of incidences? In other words, minor incidences where there's, like a rock was left that somebody could trip over versus significant incidences that have a potential for hazard to the public or something like that. In other words, how do we gradate incidences? I mean, you can report, getting stung by a yellow jacket as an incident, I suppose, and that's something that everybody who lives out in the country around here in the summer runs into.
Is that right? Is that directed at me?
Whoever wants to answer that.
I guess from the auditor's perspective, we would say, that's kind of what we're trying to point out. If there is different levels of incidences, how do you know what the appropriate response is? So if it's minor, maybe you don't need an after action review or investigation. If it's something more significant, maybe you do. But if you have multiple people making that judgment call without kind of clear criteria, then how do you know that you're consistently applying the same lens and kind of level of risk tolerance to whatever gradation of incident you might experience? But there might be something more specific. I don't think we saw any variation in the incident reporting system in terms of a current kind of categorization of the significance of the risk. Is that fair, Maggie?
Yeah. So I guess I'd pass that question on to WPES and say, do you have any suggestions on how we characterize these or qualify these different incidences? Thank you.
Good morning, Deputy Council President Lewis and Council. My name is Courtney Patterson. I'm the Asset Environmental Stewardship Division Director, and safety is in my purview. And yes, I think it's important to classify incidents and to understand trends. So in the Origami safety reporting system, there are different categories. So near miss, environmental, fire. And so that can categorize. And we are also in the process of developing some guidance for when we should hold an after action report, a meeting. So this would be when something is larger, maybe we didn't follow our SOP or our SOP didn't cover that incident, and we would hold an after action meeting. So we've been in the process of developing that for the past couple months and should have that soon.
Do you want to
Thank you.
just that it's a new system?
Yeah, sure. So the software reporting system that was mentioned in the audit, and there were different reporting mechanisms, so there were some incidents that were in the system. That system was rolling out in 2022, so it hadn't been rolled out to all of our transfer stations yet, but you know, we're using that system and continuing to work with our partners in finance and regulatory services and IT so that it's working for us and we're able to analyze the data in the best way that we can to track trends.
Thank you.
Next question from Councilor Wong.
Thank you, Deputy President Lewis, and thank you, Auditor Evans, for the in-depth report, and thank you to all the management staff for your response. I have a question and then kind of a recommendation. I guess on my question front, you know, I understand we're going to be doing significant public education around, you know, changes in, you know, recycling and waste management and kind of all the different changes that come with the state legislature. And I'm wondering, are we going to do additional public education on how to safely dispose of materials so that we can prevent, you know, explosives or radioactive materials coming into our waste stream? You know, it seems like if we're doing education, we should do more comprehensive and thoughtful education. So that's a specific question. And just kind of like operationally, in terms of audits, it seems like we have a plan and timeline in place, and I'd really like for us to revisit this conversation the next fiscal year to get a progress update. And I know, you know, Auditor Evans has come on this topic, but other topics, and we have the management, you know, accept the findings, and we're working on it. But, you know, I just want to make sure that we're having enough time to follow up on some of the previous audits that, you know, maybe didn't impact public safety as much, but touched upon things like lobbying and things like that. And those are all important, and would love to get more regular updates to make sure we're making progress on that. And, you know, just overall, I think for this council, like public safety and the safety of our employees is number one. So I really want to stress the urgency and implementing those changes that you outlined and making sure that our community is kept safe. Thank you.
Thank you. So I can respond to the first question around education. You mentioned the Recycling Modernization Act. I think we can view our education efforts in two different ways. One is what we do regionally around how people should prepare their materials at the curb and what's collected and what's not collected. And we work collaboratively with local governments on that. And there is efforts underway to design a public education campaign to help support changes that are upcoming under that new legislation. The second item is how do we educate customers on how to prepare their materials and bring them to our own stations. And so we also have efforts within our department to develop those education and communication materials, and lithium batteries is at the top of that list because that is one that we see problems at our transfer stations and some of the fires that we have that we'd like to work to eliminate. So that is a part of the work that we're doing now and increase our efforts to help residents understand how to prepare their materials and what goes in and does not go in to their loads.
And would there be specific education around radioactive materials. I understand this is from like old medical equipment, and I don't know if that's like a common instance or do.
It was, I would say it was a very uncommon instance. Most instances that we experience when it comes to radioactive waste often come in through loads that go into the scale house, not into the household hazardous waste facilities, and it's most often related to individuals that may be going through chemotherapy treatment, and we have sensors at the scale house that help us detect those loads. So this was a really unique and rare instance, and this is when it comes to our staff that are trained to help identify what these materials may look like and why we have different types of detectors and monitors on site to help identify those materials. That's a good question around how can we increase education around radioactive waste. So I
think the best approach for that, yeah. Hi, folks. Happy to be here this morning. My name is Kimberly Abels. I work in the, I manage the Strategic Crisis and Communications team in Central Comms. I also spent a lot of time earlier in my career with WPES. When it comes to those radioactive types of materials, they're so few and far between. The best way is, and how we rely on that, is with our frontline staff and how they're communicating with folks as they're bringing these things in. And so the more that we can give them talking points and tools for what to use when they do get those types of materials, and so when they do find them again, they know how to store them safely. And while we don't love for them to come to our transfer stations, it's better for us to have it than for them to have it, and who knows where it might end up. So those are very specialized campaigns that we are working on and different kinds of tools that we have available. But there's also some broader campaigns that we can do, and we can fold in that messaging to our lithium batteries and all those other different things, especially as we get these incidents where we can show the public this is why it's so important to protect our workers and to also protect their health and safety when they are using our transfer station. So they're definitely our high priorities, and we're rolling them into our campaigns.
Great. Thank you.
And I would just, with the second comment around coming back to report, we would appreciate the opportunity to come back and report on our progress of the recommendations.
And I'll just weigh in just as a reminder from the audit process, we do build in a follow-up process in kind of two different flavors. So every year we ask the departments that have outstanding recommendations within the last 5 years to self-report on the status of their recommendations, and we publish the results of that on an online dashboard, so you can always go back and look at least the last 5 years, either by year, by topic, or by recommendation. And then, if there's certain audits that you would like a formal follow-up, which is something that's a little bit more in-depth, where we do kind of a mini repeat of the audit to specifically assess the status ourselves, to let me know during my annual meetings with you all about the status or the audit schedule to prioritize, certain audit recommendations over others for follow-up.
Great, thank you.
And one additional comment that Carrie's going to share.
Our Recycling Information Center also advises callers if they do recognize that they have radioactive or explosive material in their home, because sometimes people are not aware. But when they are aware and call our RIC, they are advised to call the state or local authorities directly to handle those materials. So we do have that as a resource as well.
Thank you.
Great, we're gonna take next question from Councilor Gonzalez.
Thanks, Deputy President Lewis. First to start, appreciate the effort taken to look into safety and facilities auditor to you and your team. Appreciate that. And I do have a few questions. Before I get to those, though, I want to acknowledge that I have full faith in Dr. McGuire's team to implement the necessary changes and make sure that all of our processes are in tip-top shape, and also want to emphasize that to me and to this council, and I'm sure to our staff, that the employees, the safety of our employees is paramount, and it's just so critical, and it's something that we take very seriously. From my time on the council, I know that some of the items that were recognized in the audit that go to some of the basic structural issues of old facilities, to to point of sale, that these are things that we've been tracking for quite a while, and I think we can't understate the impact that the pandemic had in derailing a lot of improvement plans and upgrades, et cetera, that we had, just with the systemic, the paradigm shift that presented to our operations and to the shifts and all that. You know, and lastly, I really want to hone in on the comment that was made, the inherent risk of working in garbage and recycling, and especially with hazardous waste. I mean, that's why we have these facilities, because we can't always expect an everyday person to know the ins and outs, and just very proud of our staff who do work in those areas, that acknowledge that risk, and also we have a responsibility to them. But the essential workers and the leadership that they demonstrate in handling some of these materials, and in making sure that they stay out of the waste stream, because when you put something in the garbage bin, I mean, just think about all the hands and all the people that it goes through, from the curb to the landfill. So the opportunities that we can to remove that from the waste stream are very important. So one question for the auditor, and then I'll come back to staff. So as a auditor, I did read the Willamette Week article and some of the comments there. There was one line that said around the training, 97% of employees didn't receive annual radiation training in 2022. So do you know off the top of your head, like how many of those employees have never received an annual radiation training, or was there just like a 1-year lapse on that? Do you know?
Thanks for the question. I'll let Maggie answer the specifics on the data, but I think one thing to just pivot off your initial comments was to think about, we thought about the pandemic as a pretty disruptive event as well, and so we didn't want to apply an overly harsh lens, going back too far before 2022, recognizing that there was a lot of disruption, a lot of, just keep the operations going, and so could understand some variation in deviations from accepted protocols or safety requirements. So that part of the reason to focus on 2022 is to say, hey, this is kind of the first year we're starting to see, some return to potential normalcy, and we would expect after a radiation incident that was so significant that started in December of 2021, that radiation safety would be front and foremost. And when we didn't see that in the training records, I think that's why we wanted to call it out so specifically. But I'll let Maggie talk specific to the data in terms of the scope of the review.
Yeah, thank you for the question. The scope of the review was just for the 2022 training records. And to our knowledge, all employees were subject to that training, and only 3 completed the training in 2022. As far as 2020 and 2021, I'd have to look back at the records.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, there's a nuance there for sure, but the 97% number was very alarming, and I hope that we're able to, implement the necessary changes in that area. In terms of for staff, with the point of sale system, can you just re-walk us through the history and also the timeline essentially, and the resources that will be necessary to update that? I mean, when I joined in 2018. And I toured Metro Central, and we toured the scale. I mean, it was a topic of conversation, and we were really eager to get this process going. So if you could bring us up to speed as to where that is, because I mean, it is a pretty important function of our public-facing service.
Thank you, Councilor Gonzalez. First, I do want to speak to the training question that you had asked the auditor. We have many long-term staff in our household hazardous waste teams, and so I think it's reasonable to assume that many of them had received radiation awareness training prior to the pandemic. And at the time that the radium arrived at Metro South, we had a qualified radiation officer on staff who handled that response.
Okay, I would assume as much, but that's what I was trying to get to. Thank you.
For the point of sale system, I believe that we started to look at replacing it in 2019, and there was a failed RFP in trying to replace that system. Yep. So the system that we currently have, it's quite old. It is maintained by the vendor himself, And that, for many reasons, the urgency is very high. It was a top priority for me to be getting that RFP moving forward. So with the failed RFP, our IT department worked closely with finance and with members of our staff to design a special procurement to be able to find a product that would not put us in the position that we're in today. The failed RFP resulted in vendors providing their own tailored products that would require them to maintain and support. What we want is more of an off-the-shelf product that does not require that vendor to maintain and support. So with that special procurement giving us those parameters to be able to do the procurement, I'd have to think back, but I believe I'd have to look back at the actual timeline for when we started with that special procurement. But as I said, we are in negotiations with the final vendor. And it is a multi-department effort.
Yeah.
We have stakeholders from almost all central services departments because it will change people's job duties. There's capital asset management implications. It's how the software interacts with our scales. So there's hardware to look at as well. We have a systems analyst on staff, Dan Raderman, who is in Courtney's division, who is in charge of the implementation plan. We are transitioning. He's already planning for implementation as we are in the contract negotiations. And that implementation plan will also include a change management plan to incorporate all the central services involved to ensure that we're covering all our bases and ensure a smooth transition.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, when you turn off the old one and turn on the new one, it has to work. I mean,
Yes.
one day of failure and there's thousands of tons of whole bunch of material that, aren't being processed or we're guessing or something like that. So I totally understand the precaution and the methodical approach that we're taking. And just want to also add urgency to that. Like I said, it's been an issue for a few years and I'm sure much before I joined the council, and would love an opportunity to see progress on that as you have steps in doing so. The last item that I want to talk about was the audit also made a reference to our lack of certification of end market for hazardous waste. Can you speak to that a little bit and how we've managed and kind of walk through that bit of what I read?
Yes, of course. So I may have to call Tom up for a little more info on that, but the way there's no regulatory requirement for us to receive those certificates, but we wanted to be able to require those certificates to ensure that those materials were being disposed of in an appropriate manner. And as a result, our new contract with those vendors ensures that they are, I believe, responsible for monetary repercussions if they do not. So that's one control that we've put in place. But I'm going to invite Tom up to give you a little more detail on that.
Hi there, Tom Chemov. I'm the program director for garbage and recycling operations. Thank you. And the certificates of disposal, certificates of treatment are, as I understand it, a regulatory tool for sort of larger hazardous waste, the non-household industrial hazardous wastes. Because we're Metro, we kind of like to go the extra distance. And so we ask for those certificates for household hazardous waste, though they're not required. There is a manifest that we prepare for every shipment that goes out, and that, helps us track where the waste goes, but we ask for the extra step of a certificate, just to go the extra mile, to know where the waste goes and ends up ultimately.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I for sure, I want to dig a little bit more on that if it's okay, just because, we, as a operator and regulator and, system manager of the regional system, I know we work very closely with a lot of different partners on making sure that if something, we divert something, that it gets to its intended destination. So, again, it was one of the alarming aspects that, we couldn't, or maybe this is the question, with confidence, what can you share in terms of for the years, about where our household hazardous waste that we've been processing, has it been disposed of correctly and things like that? And, if not, just to talking through a little bit of some of those steps that we're taking to address that.
Thank you for that question. Some of the details I'm going to need to get back to you on.
Okay.
What I can tell you is that the companies who transport and dispose of hazardous waste are highly regulated by the federal government, by the states, by departments of transportation. I think their main lines of business are the larger industrial hazardous wastes. We sort of, how do I say it, sort of piggyback on that system with our household hazardous waste. It takes years sometimes for an item that we ship out from hazardous waste to end up at its ultimate disposal location. We can take that radioactive item as an example. I can't remember, it took 11 months or something like that for it to finally reach its final destination in a state that's east of the Mississippi. I can't remember which one.
They're all tiny out there.
Yeah.
Hard to keep track of.
I believe that most of our waste has gone to a facility in Washington for sort of later distribution because it's handled in different ways. Ammunition, for example, gets incinerated. Other items get landfilled in hazardous waste landfill. So they go to sort of a holding tank, if you are not a tank, but a holding area before they get shipped on to their ultimate destination.
All right, excellent. Well, that's it for me in terms of questions. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to engage with you in this forum, and obviously I really appreciate Councilor Rosenthal's comment about the opportunities of learning, and again, I have full faith in the team to work in making the necessary changes and adopting the recommendations. And again, thank you for your hard work, and it's appreciated.
President Peterson, do you want to take over the virtual gavel, or shall I close out this item?
Sure, I can go on from here. Thank you. Give your voice a rest. Thank you, Councilor Lewis. Much appreciated. Councilor Nolan and then Simpson.
Thanks, Madam President. Nice to have this presentation. It shines a different light than just reading the audit, which I appreciate having had it in advance. Auditor Evan, good to have your presentation. Lovely to meet you across the dais, Maggie, and thanks for being here. Very much appreciate the collaborative approach that the WPES team has taken to this audit. And I know that we have a relatively new team in key spots at WPES, and it's hard to inherit some of these long simmering issues, but stepping up and owning it, as our COO has said, is an approach that I appreciate. Thank you. I have one pretty tiny question and then an overall observation. Some of the discussion in the audit was about invisibility or lack of access to information about some of the contractors who do work for WPES. And as I heard it and read it, it was about folks who are on site, for example, doing work that might otherwise be done by Metro employees. And I'm interested in knowing how, either from the audit, did you learn how much access to information we have and utilize about their operations, about their payroll, I think you referred to, about their training. And I don't know whether it's an audit question, but even if it is, I'd like to hear how you're approaching it and how you get enough information about their operations and their finances to be able to determine if they're performing up to snuff.
Thank you for the question. I may need you to repeat the part around the audit, but I think what you're getting at is we've identified several data sources that could be used to monitor operations in various ways. And is that the nature of the question?
I'm talking about the Metro employees who work at least at Central. And I don't know as much about South. And they are on our site doing operations and services for us. I've got that right, don't I?
Yeah, I think you may be referring to the Recology contract, because there was some recommendations around looking at our contract and contract management for that larger contract that operates in our facilities.
Okay. I guess I'm not exactly sure the question, but I'll try to start and then tell me if I'm off base here. Yeah, you're right. From the audit perspective, there's two really major contracts. Recology operates in partnership with Metro at both South and Central. We see similar services provided by the contractor at both in terms of what happens inside the building, I think, other than Central has, a food waste component, and then South has a traffic management component that's done by Metro employees. So there's some variation there. And I think what the audit was trying to point out between those two contracts is one has been in place for a very long time. The Central contract has been in place for a very long time. The South contract is relatively new. And so what we were trying to point out is that the aspirations, I think, that are baked into the South contract require a fair amount of checking the books. And that might be appropriate, similar to certificates of disposal and transmission, if you want to aim for that higher level of kind of compliance or performance, but it requires somebody to do that work. And so that's a different scale of contract management than maybe Central had, or there's potentially a new Central contract. Somebody can update on the WPS side, I guess, what the status of that contract. But, one of the things that was in play during the audit was, seemed to be a plan that Metro would take over a little bit more of the operations of Central. And so that's why, especially the focus on health and safety was especially present in our audit, was thinking about, okay, if you're going to start taking on more of a responsibility, are you ready to take on some of that work and some of the risks that maybe you hadn't had too much experience compared to previous experience? Is that
it helps quite a bit.
Okay.
Thanks. So with that understanding, I'm interested in, for the contracts we have now, how do you access information to make sure you can do observations about whether they're performing daily and weekly, monthly responsibilities, but reference to pay issues and benefits and training and equipment maintenance and things like that? Do you have visibility to look into their records, their books, to review that?
That's a great question. These are significant contracts for running our operations, and in the last rounds, we have done more complex RFPs and added additional conditions to them because we wanted to see changes like living wage adjustments. And part of, once we hire that contractor or partner into our facility, is managing those contracts. So I can speak generally to it, there are conditions within those contracts that help provide insights into those areas that you mentioned. Part of Courtney's division is providing that capacity for specifically contract management to making sure that they're fulfilling their duties for all the areas that you just mentioned, from maintenance and delivery of services on site, that is something that we have to do on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, thank you. As Director McGuire mentioned, these contracts are really complicated, and they're complicated because we're trying to reach a lot of goals with them, environmental goals, living wage goals. And so we have a team, really a true team that looks at the contracts. It starts with Tom's folks, the superintendents at the sites, the supervisors at the sites that are watching the day-to-day operations and ensuring that the operations are safe and in compliance with the contracts. This is also done with a monthly joint site meeting with ourselves, Recology, the operations contractor, and Walsh, who's our transportation contractor that takes the garbage to the Arlington landfill. And so there's a meeting, there's standing agenda items, maintenance, safety, just general statistics of the operations. And so really problems can be addressed there. If there are additional, if there's additional issues, maintenance is a big part of the contracts because they're both an operations contractor and a maintenance contractor. So at South, there's a monthly maintenance meeting to make sure that the contractor is meeting our maintenance requests and the obligations in the contract. There's a staff person whose primary responsibility is to go through the payments and make sure that we are paying correct on all the different areas. So making sure that we're paying for staff correctly, make sure that we're for each maintenance project, we release those funds to them on a project by project basis. And so TFU in WPES, that's her main role, is monitoring the contract. So there are a lot of different mechanisms that we have.
Fabulous. That's what I needed to know. But before you step back, hearkening back to my personal history, I'm glad to have you on the team, Tom, as well, but having run the City of Portland's garbage oversight program a few years ago, and being the only woman in the room in all those discussions, I am personally just delighted to see who the leadership team of WPES is. And thank our COO for bringing us into the 21st century.
We're delighted we're here too.
I do have a comment, something to think about. This has been a collaborative discussion and a collaborative process even before this presentation. I know that there's been dialogue between the auditor's office and all the organizations within Metro who impact the smooth operation of all of the WPES responsibilities. What I want to comment on is what I hope is a productive tension between taking care of business now and making sure we are doing what we do now really well, safely, efficiently, with an environmental perspective and a reduction in land use waste and non-recyclable, recyclables kind of waste, and moving to expanding operations. And I don't know exactly where I am on that, but we're talking about the potential, different scenarios of major capital investment and employee workforce expansion. And I want to make sure we're getting the balance right of getting a handle on what we're doing now, giving this fabulous team a chance to really put its own mark on this program, making sure we're keeping our employees and the public safe, and the timing of how we approach any other big considerations. You can tell because my voice is a little halting as I'm trying to get the words out, it gives me some pause. And I just want to lay that out.
I appreciate that comments so much. I think you're characterizing the current situation and the tension that we do have in the decisions in front of us. So the discussions that we're having ahead will be critical. Again, we don't have a predetermined outcome about where we should be. It's really the council's direction, your values, how we as Metro can best serve the region where we need to be. And that's the discussion ahead and the decisions that need to be made.
Great. Thank you.
All right, am I good to go? All right, because nobody said anything. I want to first thank Auditor Evans and staff for your report and your audit report. I think it helps us as Metro continue to operate honestly and be transparent with the public around how we use our funds, but also how we keep folks safe here at Metro. So thank you. I want to say I'm just under a year in wrapping my head around recycling. So thank you, Marta, or Director McGuire and Director Stacy for all of your work that you're doing in this space, considering the condensed timeline that you implemented so many great things. So I have a deep appreciation for you and especially those frontline workers who have worked in hazardous conditions on a daily basis, and especially during that difficult time during COVID. You know, we won't get into that. I will highlight and lift up a no write-up OSHA report is unheard of, and you should really pat yourself on the back for that. All of you should, because I've been through a number of those, and those are not easy to pass, especially a no notice. So, good job. I want to ask, you know, one of the first things that I learned when I came in, or that you all briefed me on, was this fuel situation. And what are some of the ways that we have shifted so that we're testing the fuel, we're making sure we're getting the right product, and we're paying for what, using taxpayer dollars paying for that, but also having a foresight of saying, and to Councilor Nolan's point, how are we expanding to get off those fossil fuels and moving into electrifying our fleet and thinking about that. And then also I think about something else that Councilor Wong mentioned around education. And, at any given moment, somebody can throw a lithium battery in the trash and it's at the transfer station and we got another fire. What have we done to work with partners in the region to create drop-offs for batteries, or at least educate folks through postcards, whatever, to say, hey, you can bring your lithium batteries here until we have right to repair or end user product laws in place. So,
thank you, Councilor Simpson. I'll respond to the fuel contract question. Just a little history on that. Metro became aware of those discrepancies in June of 2022 and immediately initiated a response. We first conducted an internal investigation on the overpayments and then contracted with an outside firm to do an independent forensic accounting. Management also informed both the auditor and the council promptly. As a result of that forensic accounting, the situation has been resolved and Metro has been made whole. We've been compensated for those overpayments as well as the cost of the accounting. In terms of what we're doing currently, as part of that immediate response, we stopped doing business directly with the vendor. The vendor is located in Eastern Oregon. Our contracted trucks, you'll use that vendor to fuel up when they go to Waste Management out in Arlington. And those trucks are on a very tight timeline. We looked at other places they could fuel, and if they even turned off and went to a 10-minute stop off of I-84, it would prevent them from doing the number of runs that they do every day. So we must continue to fuel up in Eastern Oregon, and we are now doing that through a state contract through Carson Oil, and we are sampling those fuels every month to ensure that it is R99. So there are two types of fuel that vendor has provided. One is biodiesel called B5, and the other is R99, which is renewable diesel. You could call them both green fuels, but renewable diesel is preferable for WPEZ as it is the single most impact that we can have on reducing emissions at Metro on the whole. So R99 is what we have been receiving for several months from that same vendor, but through the Carson Oil contract. We are getting that renewable diesel. And in terms of looking forward, I actually am not aware of conversations around electric fleet.
I think that's something we would have to talk to our sustainability coordinator on. We had looked at smaller electric fleet, like a GOAT, at our facilities that didn't seem to operate, but that's something that we could circle back on.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. Marta, could you also just talk a little bit about the options that you looked at in the past for other alternative ways to move the compressed waste to the landfill, and what conversations are going on?
I'm gonna call our garbage and recycling operations director up to talk about that.
Take care of this time.
We need more chairs.
Hi, Tom Cham again. Thank you for that question. That's a great one. We have in our region here the great pleasure of having access to multi-modes of moving freight. As you're well aware, we can move freight by barge, by train, by truck. Not everywhere has that advantage of all those different modes of transport to move. heavy objects. Every time we go out to bid, for proposals to move our trash, we work hard to attract proposals from every single mode, and we did last time we went out for a new contract for a transporter. We received a bid for rail. Did we receive a bid for barge? I can't remember, but we have in the past received a bid for barge, and we've had multiple proposals for trucking. We look at all different factors to see what would best meet the public good. It includes a look at cost. We looked at environmental factors. And we look at efficiency. And flexibility is another important factor in procuring transport services. This last time we did this, the latest contract started in 2020, I think. Just a new one. We've got the most efficient mode of moving freight. Well, it is a very efficient mode of moving freight. It's very flexible using truck, and they're the most efficient diesel-powered trucks on the road. Most environmentally, best environmental signature for these trucks. They're Tier 4, I believe is what we call that. I'm not a trucking expert by any means, but they are the cleanest long-haul trucks on the road. One advance that we've enjoyed in the last decade or so is much heavier loads that we've been able to move. It used to be when I got here, which was many years ago, we'd move about 29 tons per load in our garbage that went up the gorge. Now we're running about 34 tons regularly, reliably for every load. So that's essentially cut down the number of trucks we would send by over 15%. So it's a really nice efficiency boost, leads to less fuel usage and fewer emissions. I can assure you next time we go out to procure transport services, we will again work hard to attract barge, rail, and trucking.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Lewis.
Good, thanks so much. So much has been discussed, and this is a really thorough audit that I want to thank the audit team and also thank management response, and in particular, Courtney Patterson and your entire team that you're building up, bringing the expertise from the 10,000 foot level all the way down to the granular daily procedure. So much of what happens at the transfer stations happens decision by decision, customer by customer. And in particular, thinking about Metro South, it is a lot of individual customers that are not there frequently, that are bringing unusual loads, and that have a lot of questions or just need help getting through the facility. So it's not only about keeping folks safe, but about keeping people informed and helping communicate their next step. When I think about Metro South, one of the critiques of the audit is a lack of vision for Metro South's future. Not only is it old and outdated, we are doing too many things on too little space. And that's a problem that we've been identifying solutions to, not only for short run, but also long-term horizon. Obviously, we looked at the Jennifer Street parcel, walked away because of all the risks associated with that site. But as an elected, I feel like when you bring up something like lack of vision, that's something that I take personally and want to kind of plant the flag that council's aware that Metro South is at a critical juncture, and we need to figure out how to make the best use of the space we have, and consider potential future investments in space in this part of the region. So my only question that's left, in the audit, there were obviously several of the trainings and procedures that were identified, and bloodborne pathogens has not gotten a lot of coverage today. So I was hoping somebody could speak a little bit more to that fragment or section of the biohazards. to make sure that we are taking that audit recommendation seriously.
I'll have our safety specialist speak to that.
Good afternoon, or is it afternoon? Yes, good afternoon.
Yes.
So as far as bloodborne pathogens, it's part of the scope of updating our SOPs to reflect every necessary task that's taken to either contain that or prevent our workers from being exposed to it. In the past, we've taken guidance from the OSHA standard, the 1910 standard, which usually dictates any general industry, and trying to adapt that to our operations so that it's more specific, similar to what Carrie was Deputy Director Carrie was mentioning earlier. And so the attention we're going to give to that is through the CPR first aid curriculum that I'm going to start designing for WPES, and then maybe expand that out to our other parts of the agency as well. And the OSHA 10 training, as well as we mentioned, covers a considerable amount of that, and then just making sure that we tailor that specifically to the nature of the operation. So whether that's needle sticks, medical waste that comes in, whatever the case might be, just making sure that we adequately protect our employees by making sure to, one, have their buy-in, because they're first and foremost are the ones dealing with it. The other portion of it is just using my safety expertise, as well as collaborating with management to make sure that there's a sound and fair plan and accounts for all the nuances that we come across. And the thing about having an SOP and a JHA tied to that is they will be able to hold that standard, so that if anything deviates, or if some other thing that we encounter during an incident or whatever it is during collection, that we're able to capture it inside that document and make sure that's part of our plan moving forward. Does that answer your question?
It did, absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for your work.
No problem. Thank
Marta, can you introduce?
For the record.
Yes, so this is, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Aaron Sahle, WPES Safety Specialist.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me just wrap up here. You know, the way I see it, the very mission, the simple, very straightforward way I look at WPES is to reduce the amount of waste into the waste stream, and safety and handling that waste is our top priority to achieving that goal. I know that from talking to the line staff many times at the transfer stations, that it is their goal and we can always do better. I appreciate the audit and the conversation and action items we have before us today. I know that our council leadership and line staff have safety as a top priority for both the public and the employees. In fact, as we heard earlier from the Metro Central Transfer Station recently passed the surprise inspection. And that is, again, kudos to all of our staff in being able to get to that place. While Metro staff and our contractors handle that waste with an excellent safety record verified by DEQ, OHA, and state partners, there are specific places we can do better. And two of those I heard today and read in the audit were training and capital facilities improvements. And we spent a lot of time talking about those too, but I just want to reiterate on the training prior to this year's audit, WPES created a new asset environmental stewardship division that focuses on facility maintenance, health and safety, environmental compliance, and contract oversight. And I just want to give kudos to both our director and our COO for standing that this division provides leadership in a variety of areas, including the development of a comprehensive safety program for all our WPES facilities. And to the recognition of our COO for for Metro-wide safety and being able to stand up programs. Since she took her position, Marisa, 2 weeks prior to COVID, being able to see all these things on the ground in real time in person was difficult, but you actually saw even through all of that and tried to get out as much as you could in a safe way during COVID. And I just want to recognize that that was not easy. And Marta coming on also at the same time, you guys did a great amount of work actually during COVID to start this process rolling. So just again, thank you. And I, like Councillor Wong, and I think the rest of the council, expect that we will hear monthly updates. I'm just going to put it out there as a monthly update. I'm not going to wait around for 6 months or for it to be in a dashboard. I appreciate the auditor's dashboard, but that's not oversight for the council. Council is very proactive. So we'll just want to stay on top of this and make sure that the trend is in the right direction. So I appreciate that and the COO's assessment and changes to practices to increase safety for the training. On the facilities, I'm going to take off where Councilor Nolan and Lewis left off. The council is very aware of the capital needs of these sites. It has personally been my top concern moving forward with these needed capital improvements. However, the 30-year waste management plan was created before the entire of this council was seated, and it really never prioritized needs, showed all of the needs and solved for all of the needs. But what that left us with is a very costly plan that places the burden on the residents of this region to pay for what had been proposed. That is why we have asked the staff for scenarios to better balance priorities and decrease any rate increases, the need to increase our dependence on an ever-increasing waste stream, which is the opposite of our intended mission. So I'm looking forward to having those conversations as quickly as possible with our ratepayers, our mayors, our waste industry partners, and our employees. It is obvious to me that no one will prioritize safety as last place as we go through this conversation, but we need to do a practical set of next steps to move forward in agreement on how to pay for it all. And I'm very excited about the seating of a new committee to be able to walk through how to get there. So I'm very excited that we are moving forward in that direction and have a council that is intensely looking at being able to balance all of that. So thank you. With that, councilors, I think we have had a thorough discussion. I am looking forward to the follow-up. I want to thank you to Auditor Evans and to our staff for the response, and move on in our meeting. Thank you, everybody. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. We'll move on to ordinances, our second reading. Councilors, for our next agenda item, we will be considering 4 separate ordinances considering housekeeping and streamlining provisions relating to solid waste, contested cases, and civil penalties. We will hold a vote for each ordinance. We had our first readings in a public hearing at our October 5th meeting. As we discussed at that meeting, these ordinances would change Metro Code. We received no public testimony on the ordinances during the public hearing. With us is Shane Abma, Senior Metro Attorney, here to answer any additional questions. We'll start with ordinance number 23-1498 for the purpose of amending certain Metro Code chapters in Title 5, Solid Waste for housekeeping updates, and to incorporate plain language best practices. Shane, do you have any opening remarks, or should we just move to any questions from the councilors?
Council President, you can just move forward if you'd like.
All right, thank you. Councilors, do you have any questions for staff? Shaking heads, no hands raised. Do I have a motion for ordinance number 23-1498?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilor Simpson and I believe seconded by Councilor Rosenthal. Any further discussion? All right, Connor, will you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Councilor Nolan,
Yes.
Councilor Lewis,
Aye.
Councilor Wong,
Aye.
Councilor Gonzalez,
Aye.
Councilor Rosenthal,
Yes.
Councilor Simpson,
Aye.
and President Peterson.
Aye, the motion passes. Thank you so much. We'll move on to ordinance number 23-1499 for the purpose of repealing Metro Code Chapter 2.05 Procedure for Contested Cases and replacing it with a new updated Metro Code chapter, Contested Cases Procedures. Shane, do you have any presentation?
No further presentation.
Thank you. Councilors, do you have any questions? Seeing none and no hands raised, do I have a motion for ordinance number 23-1499?
So move.
Second.
Been moved by Councilor Rosenthal, and I didn't catch who was the second.
Nolan.
Thank you, Councilor Nolan. Any further discussion, council? Seeing none, Connor, will you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Councilor Simpson,
Yes.
Councilor Wong,
Aye.
Councilor Rosenthal,
Aye.
Counselor Nolan,
Yes.
Counselor Gonzalez,
Yes.
Counselor Lewis,
Aye.
and President Peterson.
Aye, the motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to ordinance number 23-1500 for the purpose of repealing Metro Code Chapter 2.03 Civil Penalties and replacing it with a new Metro Code Chapter 2.03 Civil Penalties and amending certain Metro Code chapters to align with the new Chapter 2.03. I'm assuming we don't have a presentation. We'll move on to counselor questions. Seeing none, do I have a motion for ordinance number 23-1500?
Move approval.
Second. Nolan second.
It's been moved by Counselor Gonzalez and seconded by Counselor Nolan. Counselors, any further discussion? All right, Connor, will you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Counselor Lewis,
Aye.
Counselor Rosenthal,
Aye.
Counselor Nolan,
Yes.
Counselor Gonzalez,
Aye.
Counselor Simpson,
Aye.
Counselor Wong,
Aye.
and President Peterson.
Aye, the motion passes. Thank you. All right, lastly, for the ordinances, ordinance number 23-1501 for the purpose of amending Metro Code Chapter 5.09 illegal disposal to align it with the new Metro Code, Chapter 2.05 contested cases, and incorporate plain language best practices. Counselors, do we have any questions?
None.
All right. Not seeing any hands raised and shaking heads. Do I have a motion for ordinance number 23-1501?
Move approval, Counselor Gonzalez.
Second.
Been moved by Counselor Gonzalez and seconded by Counselor Rosenthal. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Connor, will you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Counselor Rosenthal,
Yay.
Counselor Wong,
Aye.
Counselor Gonzalez,
Aye.
Counselor Lewis,
Aye.
Counselor Simpson,
Aye.
Counselor Nolan,
Yes.
and President Peterson.
Aye, the motion passes. Thank you so much. All right, we'll move on to other business. We are going to get an update on the strategic targets. Counselors, this is our second opportunity to discuss the strategic targets project at a council meeting. As you recall, Metro Council directed staff to develop strategic targets in the areas of environment, economy, and housing to guide our work over the next 5 years. We held our first work session on the item at our October 3rd meeting. We then held a public town hall on October 12th to hear firsthand from stakeholders about the targets, their relevance, and if stakeholders could see themselves or their organizations working with Metro to make progress on those targets. We have staff back again today to present the work that has been done since our last discussion. And we have our COO, Marisa Madrigal, to kick it off. Thank you.
Thank you, President Peterson. Hello again, Council. I believe we have a PowerPoint presentation, so just wait for that to load.
Just taking a little bit longer to load than usual today. Sorry about that.
No problem. I'll just breathe for a moment.
Sorry, I just have a frozen computer here, so I'm going to bring up the presentation now.
Okay, no problem.
Okay.
Great. Okay, if we could just go ahead and advance to the next slide. Thank you. So, hello again, Council. This slide may look familiar to you. Our team came to you all on October 3rd to discuss the progress we've made so far on development of these strategic targets and present staff recommendations in the areas of environment, economy, and housing. After that session, we held a virtual town hall on October 12th to solicit feedback from our partners and other community stakeholders on the recommended targets. At today's work session, we would like to recap what we heard from the last work session and last Thursday's town hall, as well as present some polling results from that town hall. We'd also like to solicit your thoughts about the feedback we received and how you would like that feedback to shape the strategic targets or our implementation plan, as well as how you envision your role in shepherding this work into the next stages. Whether you'd like to lean into Metro's existing strengths and use our operations and policies to move this work forward, or if you'd like to take an active role leveraging your relationships with our partners and political acumen to help broaden the scope of these targets, or some combination thereof. Please keep these questions in mind as we move through our presentation today, as we'll be circling back to them for the discussion portion. Without further ado, I'll hand it off to our presenters for today, Val Galstead, Director of Strategic Operations, and Ina Zucker, Council Office Program Director, to walk you through the rest of the slides. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Marisa. Thank you, President Peterson, councilors. Good to see you all today, to be here talking about this again. Can I get the next slide? So as Marisa shared, we're bringing you some updates and seeking additional guidance before we move to adoption of the targets. Additionally, within your packet, you received a draft resolution for the adoption of the targets. When we get to the discussion portion, we want to specifically ask for your feedback on that so that we can continue to move this work forward with a balance of both urgency and thoughtfulness. So I just wanted to put a plug in there for that. But before we get there, I want to take a moment to reflect what we heard at our last work session from you all. So we heard individually and collectively you tell us that we need ways to communicate differently about this work so that the public and our partners understand where Metro is going. You asked that we develop a simplified version of the targets to make their communication more digestible. And so in that, we do plan to develop a communication strategy around this. You also felt strongly that we needed to engage our partners as we plan implementation. You felt that the scope of these targets should include items both directly within our control as well as those in which we can lean into our role as a convener and an influencer in the region. And you asked that we incorporate polling into the town hall to get content in a variety of ways, or to get feedback in a variety of ways on the content of the targets. And we hope that some of the slides today will help generate more conversation about next steps. Next slide. So on this slide, you'll see a little bit more detail than was included at our last work session, but it might look vaguely familiar. So as you'll recall, this spectrum was intended to demonstrate the ways in which we can implement this work, with the blue side representing the implementation of practices and policies that are within Metro's control, and the orange side representing the implementation of bodies of work where Metro plays an influential role, but not necessarily one of oversight. So necessarily when we think of work that's within Metro's authority, we will be able to implement that work on a shorter timeline, whereas work that relies on heavy external engagement, convening, and decision-making from other organizations is going to take longer to implement and will require a heavier involvement from both our elected leaders and from senior leaders around the organization. At the last work session, Council President Peterson specifically asked that we begin to consider the short versus long-term nature of the various components of the implementation of this work. And so this is just an initial draft of that, but we will be sure to incorporate that thinking into any implementation planning. So as I shared on the last slide, we heard from you that you wanted us to balance this work with elements within our control and those within our influence. But you also stressed that we be thoughtful when and with whom we use our labor and energy in the influencing space. You know, we as an organization, Metro, is a convener. And we're gonna continue to use our partners' time strategically as we decide where to lean in as a convener and as we go into implementation planning. We'll also continue to build out a project timeline focused first on the short-term tasks within our control, and you can see some of those represented on the left side of the slide. For example, facility operations and wildfire mitigation plans. And then we'll also strategically pursue the long-term work related to these targets which you can see represented on the right side of this slide, some examples of which are waste policy reform, work on the regional transportation plan, urban growth boundary, etc. Can I get the next slide? Okay, so based on your feedback in the last session regarding the ability to communicate these concepts clearly and succinctly, we worked with our consultants at Drawbridge Innovations to come up with this draft graphic. You'll see in the center, sort of in that white triangle, a potential unified North Star statement, which was actually only lightly edited from Councillor Wong's off-the-cuff suggestion. So thank you, Councillor Wong, for writing that for us. We believe a visual like this, with this high level of information, will be a valuable tool for our staff and for you all to share this work and communicate it more easily. We're excited to get to the point where you adopt targets in the next few weeks so that we can work with Metro's communications department to refine this graphic, as well as create a toolkit with additional polished graphics, easy to understand and remember text, and other communications tools that will provide an opportunity for everyone in the region to see themselves in this work. So with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Ina Zucker, to provide an overview of the town hall before we move into discussion.
Thank you, Val. Hello, President Peterson, councilors, nice to see you all today. Thanks for having us back. On October 12th, 1 week ago, we had a really good turnout for the Strategic Targets Town Hall you hosted. The attendees included partners and stakeholders from around the region, including elected officials, union members, environmental advocates, and folks from community-based organizations. And Metro staff were also there, including directors and members of the subject matter expert teams that have been working on this project for months. Overall, the comments were mostly very positive from the over 40 external participants, plus some comments submitted in writing. Some of the main things that we heard, as you'll see on this slide, are climate change is the issue of our time, and continue to focus there. We also heard we need more housing, all different kinds of housing. You were told, please be mindful of impacts on trade unions in the work that we do. And we also had folks who felt very passionately about Metro's natural areas work because it is core to Metro mission and important to the public. Finally, you heard as Val has been sort of detailing for you, to emphasize work in areas Metro can control and continue partnering with others in doing work outside of that. The project team has really struggled over the months with distilling a vast number of targets, strategies, and metrics down to the level we showed attendees at the town hall, without signaling that Metro is no longer pursuing some of our core work. And we recognize that the desire to include more targets and more strategies and more metrics is real, but also that you've directed us over and over to not try and move the ball on too many targets at once or risk making no progress at all on any of them. Next slide, please. So I know this is hard to read, it is small, but this is the first of two slides on the town hall, on the results from the town hall polling. About 25 to 30 people responded to the poll. And as you can see from the slide, feedback was largely positive. Stakeholders overwhelmingly supported the content and direction of the targets and felt that the strategies that we detailed were largely effective. The attendees who took the poll signaled that they agreed that the targets do address the most pressing issues in the environment, economy, and housing areas, and that the strategies that we showed them while they were taking this poll will be effective in making progress on each target. Next slide, please. So this is the second slide from the polling. As you can see, again, very positive responses to the question, how effective are these strategies that we showed them on the individual slides in meeting their target? For the economy, it ranged from 72 to 92% for attendees who believe these strategies were effective in meeting the target. For environment, it was 90 to 93%, and for housing, it went as high as 96%. So that's what I have for you from the town hall, and I will hand it back to Marisa.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay.
So as I mentioned earlier, at this work session, we're hoping to solicit your thoughts about the feedback we received in the last work session in the town hall, and how you would like that feedback to shape our implementation plan. We'd also like to hear your reactions to the proposed approach to balance Metro's direct and indirect influence thoughtfully with a view of short and long-term strategies. And we would love to hear how you envision your role in the next phase of this work. Lastly, it would be helpful to hear any feedback you have on the draft resolution that's included in your packet, so that staff can make changes to it accordingly. So with that, it's a tall order, but we have confidence in you. I'll hand it back to President Peterson.
Thank you. Councilors, any comments, suggestions, observations? Councilor Huang.
Great, thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Ina and Val. Great work. I like the more focused indicators. And I think in terms of the wordsmithing on that North Star statement, I think my off-the-cuff comment before was like something about a most affordable and climate resilient place in America. And, I understand that maybe, that might not be appropriate, but also I think throughout this process, like one dimension that I think we are missing is just attaching a sense of ambition and urgency around it. And the way that the North Star reads to me is like we're building, a affordable and resilient region. But I think what I was trying to hint at before too was just that, we want to be national leaders, we want to be ambitious, and, communities out there are having a tough time, so we want to tackle these issues urgently. And I don't know how to say that, like I want to like compete with everyone else in the country, but like there is, a sense of urgency that I'm really feeling, and also just a sense that I think this region can do amazing and great things if we put our minds to it and work together. And I really want that to kind of like be felt in the work in the statement.
Thank you so much for that comment. We can work with our communications team to figure out the best way to frame that. I think that they'll have some good ideas in a way that's inspiring and ambitious, but not like overly competitive.
We gotta be number one. No, I'm just kidding.
It's just
It's okay to be competitive.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Chair Peterson. I have a couple comments and then one question, I guess. And probably, maybe I'll pose the question first, but I'm still a little unclear, since Metro is not, on most of these, not all of these, but more or less a bit player, and we have to rely on the cities and the counties really to do the work. I think the question of how we roll this out to get them to cooperate and understand the process is going to be paramount in this issue. I have two suggestions for changes. Strategy 3 on number 1, which says climate-related deaths and illnesses. These are really relatively minor. I mean, they're important, don't get me wrong, but I would suggest the wording natural disaster-related deaths and illnesses. Two of the big things that are going to cause deaths and illnesses are going to be the earthquake and possibly a flood, which may or may not be climate-related. We've had, 96, we had a big flood, and we had the Vanport flood, of course. So I would suggest that one, and then on the strategy 1 on resilient economy, we talk about quality jobs. I'm just wondering if we really mean living wage jobs as opposed to quality. I'm not sure what quality really implies. Quality is a broader term, and maybe it's sufficient. And then one other question is when we talk about safe and stable housing, since this is one of the areas where we're actually heavily involved because we provide a lot of funding for the supportive services, should we have some mention in there of, an adequate or sustainable supportive services for people who need them? It's a concept that's not just the housing. As we know, you can't just provide housing, you have to provide the support for people to stay in the housing. And then finally, the one comment that I noticed on all this, and we have to be somewhat careful, is you could achieve most of these metrics without any specific attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion. In other words, you could do this in a non-diverse, equitable, or inclusive society because you could get good job numbers, you could get more housing and not necessarily make it available to everybody. So I think we have to be somewhat careful that we don't lose sight of this as one of the key focuses that Metro has. But
Thank
you.
Thank you so
Sorry.
much. We have Andrea here to speak to the quality jobs question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Council President Peterson, and thank you, Councilor Rosenthal, for that question. Just to speak a little bit to the actual definition, it is a well-known definition that was actually defined by our partners within this space, and it has components of, and I do not have the exact definition in front of me, so I apologize about that. I will send that to council as a follow-up, but it has components not only of wages, but also things like benefits and time off and different things like that. So really, it's more encompassing than just the wage.
Okay, so there is a specific definition
There is a
for
specific
quality.
definition, yes.
Okay, that I'm not aware of, okay.
In terms of your
Great.
comment, oh, did you have more? I'm sorry. Nope. On the environment section, I think natural disaster-related deaths and illnesses is actually a really good edit, so thank you for that.
And then I'll just respond quickly to the safe and stable housing component. So I think that this is a situation of, as we try to distill it down more and more and more, less detail is shown. But I can assure you that we are looking, and in previous drafts and in the more detailed documents, we do have quite a lot of reference to our supportive housing services work and the supportive services specifically, as well as the housing itself. So that is still reflected, just not in the simplified version.
Yeah, my concern, I guess, is that when we roll this out and we take this out to all the small, whether we take it to all the small cities and the counties, will they read all the background information and know what's included and what's not? It's always a balancing act of keeping it brief, keeping, the KISS principle, as you say, as well as also making sure that the important elements are not forgotten. So,
Absolutely.
just a comment.
Yeah, thank you. We'll make sure to underscore that.
All right, thank you. Councilor Nolan, then Gonzalez.
Thanks, Madam President. Thanks for this. I want to weigh in a little bit on the feel of our North Star statement. I see the Portland region as something of an incubator in these areas. We are not big enough to wag the dog of markets, but we can prove concepts in a broad enough scale that they can be duplicated by other metropolitan areas. And that's the flavor I'd like to have in there, that we take advantage of our position to take risks and be more nimble than massive metropolitan areas like Los Angeles and New York, to create an environment that others can and want to follow. Now get your wordsmiths to put that into a pithy statement along with his, and that gets it for me. Ambitious, urgent, and replicable. Those are the things that I'm interested in seeing. I have some specific comments on the language here. Remind me again, if you would, the timeline for this. Over what period of time are we going to implement this strategy?
It's a 5-year time horizon.
But I think, or do you mean when are we going to sort of hit go on this?
No, that was it.
Okay.
Thanks, Val.
Mm-hmm.
Even more critically then, given that timetable, I continue to want objective, agreed upon measurements that 5 years from now, those of us who are still sitting at this table can say, yep, we can measure it, we can all agree we did or didn't get there. Reducing and increasing does not do that. And, if it were 50 years, so much changes over that time, we could be a little more amorphic. But over 5 years, I think we need to say, cut it in half. Reduce it by 25%, reduce it to 0. And in fact, on the very last one, page 3, safe and stable housing, I think it ought to be eliminate chronic homelessness. Now, 5 years, cut it in half. We ought to be that bold. We're on a 10-year supportive services program. If we haven't cut it in half in 5 years, we're not approaching a glide scope that will get us there. And we don't want a reduction in the population, we want a reduction in the circumstance of that population. Reduce by how much? And I don't want there to be very different interpretations of this. Someone could say reduce means 5%, and someone could say reduce means, half the distance to the goal. So the extent to which we can tighten it, and there may be some debate on this dais about what those targets should be, we're capable of having that debate, and I'd like you to put it out in front of us so that we can. On the first page, we have reduce emissions, and it's regional greenhouse gas emissions. I assume that means total, and I want total to be applied to strategy 2. I don't think we can get to the level of reduction in waste to landfill that we need to if we only reduce the per capita waste, given the expected population growth we will have. And yes, Ina, I see your, ooh, that's harder. Yeah, it's harder. But I think we're capable of it, and we should be aiming for not just each individual goes from, I don't know what it is, 100 pounds to 98 pounds, but the total waste, because we've implemented or lobbied for packaging requirements and we've lobbied for other things or we've regulated things, actually means we can absorb the growth without straining our resources for handling that waste. And the other thing I would suggest, and we can have a debate about it if people want to, but on the second page on economy, strategy 2, I don't think the number of shovel-ready sites tells us what we need to know or is really where we want to go. I think we want to measure acres, because we could have a bunch of scattered or some other measure that says how many jobs can we support. Because if it's 500 acres and it's scattered around among 450 sites, that's probably not as productive for the economy as if we had 500 acre sites or something like that. So something that is more than just sites, and whether acres is the right number, I'll defer to staff, but something that the capacity of jobs that the shovel-ready land can support is what I'm interested in. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Nolan. We're definitely looking forward to the stage where the folks who are expert in these areas, which is not us, including data experts, can sort of look at your feedback and also say, where can we find the data? How can we get the data? And then obviously, how ambitious do we want to be in the actual setting of the numbers or the percentages or the number of sites? And I like the idea of that, that decision coming back to you when we're in the implementation phase in the next 6 months, so that that's a council decision on level of ambition. And that word's been thrown around a lot today, so.
Personally, colleagues, I would rather come a little short of a really ambitious goal than a little bit beyond a puny goal. So that's my philosophy.
If I could just weigh in for a moment on the ambition piece, because I think, having an ambitious statement and ambitious goals is something that is personally and professionally exciting to me, and I know that it is to the rest of the team. And I think there's also a difference between being ambitious and picking targets or measures that we don't have influence over. And so I hope that that's a conversation that we can have collectively, both, you know, operations and policy, and how do we find that sweet spot of things that are reaches, but that are not impossible, that we can, in this 5-year timeline, actually, you know, effectuate change, and just have, you know, an open dialogue about that.
Great. Thank you. I look forward to that. Counselor Gonzalez, and then Simpson and Huang and Lewis.
Yeah, I'll be really quick. Just first and foremost, very impressed by the town hall and the engagement, the participation. Well done. So I was happy to see that. You know, in general, I'm very impressed that we are down to like this level of focus. And I see in this document, you know, an amalgamation of a lot of opinions, counselors, community members, business leaders. And so, you know, I think it's natural that there's inherent like splitting of hairs, you know, with specific items. But I think one of the things that I've really learned to appreciate in my work, in my career, is when you open up the process, there's a give and take, right? But that's the beauty of gaining the buy-in. And so I see that specifically just for answering the questions on the strategies. I see that. I think there's a healthy blend of approach for what Metro has directly, and also the areas where there's indirect leadership. I see areas where there are multiple diverse stakeholders asking us to step up, to help address a problem, to help the region show up in Salem with the legislature, to do something with the 3 counties. So again, I just wanted to share that really briefly and commend you for the work. And at this point, I don't have further comment. Thanks.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Simpson.
Thank you, President Peterson. I want to say real quick, and I know we're short on time. I appreciate the comments made by my colleagues. When I see this document, I also think about, I'm a very visual person, so I think about like, well, what does this look like? You know, like if we're saying it and we have it in these boxes, but like if we can make a rendering or what we are trying to approach so that we kind of can see and have a visual of that North Star, but also, and maybe this isn't the right space for it, but you know, a lot of comments were made around we don't have direct influence over some things within this targets. How do we work with our partners to help them get up to speed, and then also possible funding strategies around all of these targets, including using our resources to do so?
Thank you for the question. As far as your comment about a visualization, we are on board with that. We definitely, we want to work with our communications team and potentially some consultants who specialize in design to really think about how we can communicate this very complex project and complex work in a simple, understandable way. I expect it'll be a series of graphics that we'll be creating, so you can look for that in the coming months.
I especially think about like our non-native English speaking folks and folks, refugee and immigrant communities. Like we, you know, they live in this region too, and they participate, and they should be able to know what we are setting their lives up to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's like a really critical part of the rollout, particularly as we think about the impact that this is going to have, to your point of the impact that this is going to have to people all around the region, but also our jurisdictional partners. Like, we need to also provide them the tools to communicate this. So we're definitely keeping that in mind in this next phase. And then to your question about how we're connecting with our jurisdictional partners. So that portion of this project is definitely not fleshed out yet. We have a vision though as a team that following the adoption of these high-level targets, we'll engage in a pretty robust engagement process with our jurisdictional partners, and we hope that many of you can join us and we can use existing relationships, build new relationships, to work with them, both to get them up to speed on the work, but also as we dig into the details of the work and start to look at the actual like nitty-gritty numbers to Councilor Nolan's request, that necessarily needs to be done in partnership with local jurisdictions and really like all of the impacted organizations, not just local governments. So we do expect a relatively in-depth engagement process, at least over the next, 6-9 months, I think we were talking about. And so we will definitely be tapping all of you to help with that.
Yeah, a lot of what's in this plan is intertwined in a lot of the work that we have going on now. And the question that always comes up is, what's the funding strategy? What's the funding? So I would like to make sure that that is a running theme behind all of this, so that as we think about our region and the North Star and what we want this to be, we can point tangibly at a dollar or a bucket source and say, hey, this is how we're going to get this done. Hopefully, fingers crossed, if we can get it.
Part of the timeline for our seeking your approval for the targets in this is to have the targets identified before we build budgets for next fiscal year, so that this can be used as a prioritization tool for our departments as we're thinking about what our internal resources might be, and so that this can weigh in on directors when they're sort of weighing the trade-offs of where to grow and where not to grow.
And one of you commented in our previous session also that the targets right now seem very siloed. They're not across departments, and that's another thing that we want to really work on during implementation. So it's not sort of what is solid waste doing, what is planning doing, what are the venues doing, but the targets have more of a cross-departmental feel to them, not just in the statements, but to sort of break away from, it's just about greenhouse gas, where it's just about recycling more. So that all of Metro and the whole region can see themselves in the targets. But at the same time, we start chunking into things that we can control first. And as we're having as you're having those conversations with jurisdictional partners, we at home can also be sort of already starting to work on some of these things that are within Metro's control on that direct side of the scale.
Thank you.
Councilor Wong, you've already had one opportunity. Do you have a quick question, or should I come back to you?
I can defer to Councilor Lewis, and if there's time, I do have a quick question.
Okay, go ahead.
Sure, I'll be really quick. I think that it's really important to balance our ambition and our desire to communicate out to the region what is possible with the way we started this tool, which is part of a way to inform our budget process, and the opportunity to make sure that we are making every attempt to link what these goals are to investments that we could actually make through our departments, through our budgets. I don't see that reflected in the resolution that was included in the packet, and I think that it's important as we consider where we put the finer points on our goals at the end of the day. I want to be ambitious, but I want to tie them to investments we can make, whether that's executing program or better supporting the lobbying team who's out doing the work at the legislature, the federal level, or better engaging local jurisdictions in our 3 counties.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Wong.
Oh, great, thank you. Just on the economy strategy, I see add quality jobs in regional labor force participation, and I'm wondering if we had thought about having an indicator around income inequality, or instead of using per capita income, using more median income. And I'm thinking about in the future as we grapple with like automation and AI and all that, like just adding quality jobs may not be enough if we're losing well-paying jobs in other sectors. So if I add 10,000 jobs, but I'm losing, 20,000 trucking jobs or something, like that's not really a net positive for us. And also thinking of cities like the Bay Area where you might add a lot of high-quality jobs, but normal people can't afford to live there. So I'm wondering if we can have some sort of like qualifier or indicator that, yes, we want to add quality jobs, but what we're really looking at is, reducing kind of income disparity that leads to societal problems that we see in other places.
Thank you for that. Andrea, did you want to comment on that at all?
Council President Peterson, Councilor Wong, thank you for that question. We went through a number of iterations in trying to articulate the appropriate way to really capture the comments that we got from stakeholders and the input that we got from counselors around regional affordability. We went through several drafts in your guys' briefings, but some of them were looking at, raising the wage in the bottom quartile to try to get at quality jobs. We also previously in iterations had the quality of life indicators, which really got more at the equity and regional affordability. And in our simplification process, we have not presented those as our key regional metric. That's not to say that those aren't necessarily embedded in the work. And knowing that all of the feedback and input that we got from stakeholders really can be embedded in implementation plans and can be a lens on how we're actually implementing. I am happy to circle up with our Tiger team and see if there is a better metric as opposed to quality jobs that does more fit with that lens, and I do appreciate that feedback. But yes, there was a lot of work that went into it, and then it is possible that we have oversimplified and trying to find that balance and how we're communicating. But that was definitely things that we talked about as a Tiger team and definitely things that we heard from stakeholders, so thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate some more thinking with the team on that, just because, quality jobs for some doesn't mean a more affordable reason.
Absolutely, yes, thank you.
Awesome. Let me wrap up then. I just want to thank staff for working so hard to get us to this point as quickly as possible, because we are trying to affect a budget process that's coming up rather quickly. So thank you for that. The one thing that I am rather unsettled on as we come out of the town hall meeting and conversations is that I feel like we have left some of our stakeholders with a feeling that because there isn't a very specific performance metric related to their interests, but yet it's a core mission of what we do, and I'll just use the parks as one of that, of like total acres purchased, right, from our parks bond measure. I think we've left them feeling, and others feeling like that we don't see that as part of our core mission. And I know you talked a little bit about that in your introductory comments, but I do feel like we need to make it abundantly clear that under these three major headings and under some of the performance metrics, the actions that we take need to speak louder than the words. And the core work that we do within each of those departments needs to be represented in those actions to meet those goals. And I do want to take a minute and think through, offline, where we need to be more specific so that people do see that we are still actually doing the work that we have in our core missions, that we haven't abandoned that. So I'm not sure exactly with each stakeholder where all that is, but I did feel a little unsettled coming out of the town hall that we may have left that impression. So we need to figure out how to deal with it. So that's the first thing. Second, I think this is a great first step, but like Councilor Lewis, I would like to see in the resolution the next steps reflected, because we have generally outlined these things, but they do not have targets yet. They are not targets, they are just statements, and they do need targets associated with them. So we do need to set targets. We do need to set actions, and we do need to have what we're doing on the budget all in one giant spreadsheet that's in my head, that I can see visually, and it's beautiful and it has color just for Andrea. But Andrea, you love colors in your spreadsheets, don't you? Yes, she does. So I think there's some next steps that we need to put in and timelines that we need to put into that resolution in order for me to feel comfortable that what we're adopting is a point in time. Here's where we're at, and we're saying, yes, that's the direction. I think the other column that's in my head that still seems to be kind of, I think, a definitional issue for staff in terms of what we have in our core mission that's within our control versus where we are a coordinator and convener, and versus where we are a helper, where we are part of a team. And I go back to Reimagine Oregon in all of this. When we were working with Reimagine Oregon, and they had a massive spreadsheet that we encouraged them to create that had that kind of level of information in it. And that's kind of where I want to go. I want to be able to track whether in our core mission, whether we're a facilitator or whether we're a helper. And that goes along your continuum, but whether we're a convener or a helper, we need to identify the actions that go along with what we're supposed to be doing. Otherwise, we truly aren't convening and we truly aren't helping. We're just following. And I think that proactiveness is what I've heard from the counselors and from our stakeholders and even our staff. So I guess trying to answer all of your questions in one, I just come down to the next steps and what do we want to see in a spreadsheet as we move forward and how all that ties in together with the budget. So I hope that's helpful. With that, thank you. With that, Melissa, any further comments on this before we move on?
Thank you, President Peterson. You know, and as I'm processing the conversation, I think it's going to be an interesting process as we zero in on so we have these draft targets, and then as we work with subject matter experts to define like the number that we're going to hit, I think we're naturally going to start to have a conversation about like, well, what actions can we actually take to get to that number? And we may find that we have a lot of actions in some areas and maybe very few in others. And so I think, you know, we should consider this, or I would share my unsolicited opinion that we should sort of keep these in mind as drafts and allow ourselves to iterate with our stakeholders and our subject matter experts, so that at the end of the day, we have meaningful numbers, meaningful indicators, and meaningful goals that we can reach for. So I've really appreciated all the feedback that we've gotten today. I know staff has to, and I appreciate your just continued attention and feedback. Thank you.
No, and I think that's exactly what we want to see in this massive spreadsheet in my head is where are the gaps, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. Councilor Rosenthal, do you have a quick comment or do you want to hold it?
I'll
and
hold
talk
it,
to
I'll ask offline.
Okay, all right, thank you. With that, we'll move into Chief Operating Officer Communication. Melissa, go ahead.
I have nothing further for you today, Council. Thank you.
Wow, okay. Thank you. Counselor Communication, counselors. Oh, and thank you to staff leaving the room. Much appreciated. Counselors, any communication today? Counselor Lewis.
Just a brief update that the Expo Future Sports and Facilities Committee met for the second time yesterday. We had the consultant who will be making a November visit to town, and we were helping to prepare all of the lay of the land analysis that we will be putting into our study.
Thank you. Counselor Gonzalez.
Thanks, President Peterson. Yeah, very quickly, we had JPAC this morning, and touched on a letter that JPAC is sending to the Oregon Transportation Commission, which you can find in the meeting packet. We also went over some key points of the RTP, as JPAC will be voting on a recommendation that will come to the council next month, and also did an overview on the high-capacity transit strategy in the 82nd High-Capacity Transit Plan. Overall, a smooth meeting.
Great, thank you. Counselor Huang.
Oh, great, thank you. This Saturday from 11 to 1, Metro staff will be holding like a public presentation at Lone Fir Cemetery, Block 14, for some preliminary designs that came up for the memorial. So 11 to 1 at Block 14 at Lone Fir if folks are interested.
Awesome, thank you, everybody. Seeing no other hands. Oh, Counselor Nolan.
Nope.
Oh.
It was bye.
Oh, it was goodbye. All right, seeing no hands raised and no further discussion, the council meeting is adjourned for today. Our next regularly scheduled meeting is Tuesday, October 24th at 10:30 a.m. Thank you, everybody.